The mistake in modern Christianity is thinking that we have to have the answers, or that we have to give people the answers. It's okay if you don't know. Sometimes the best answer for people is, bro, I don't know. I'm figuring it out though.
Yeah.
And just sitting there in that place, like, we don't need to have an absolute answer if we're working it out on our own.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Things You Don't Hear in Church podcast. My name is Ethan.
And my name is Derry. And welcome back, everybody. If you haven't, check us out on all the social medias that we have. We have all of them, pretty much. Go leave us reviews, rate us, hopefully 5 stars, and let us know what you want to hear next time on the podcast. We always love to hear your engagement, all your ideas, your questions. So let us know. Let us know what you thought of this episode as well. Yeah, let's jump into it.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking to you guys about how to find good, healthy Christian community. And joining us in this conversation, we have our guest, Hunter Hughes. If you guys, some of you very well might follow him on Instagram. He has a really cool art account where he has some beautiful art that he's created. Along with that, he is involved with ESPN right now. He works with ESPN. But formerly he was in full-time ministry, transitioned out of ministry, and has walked the road of going from high Christian community all around him all the time in the ministry world to not in the ministry world and having to be very intentional in seeking out Christian community. So he joins us today to talk about that very topic. So is there anything else that we missed that you want to cover?
No, it's pretty good. Great to see you guys. Good morning.
Yeah.
Good morning. Right? It's very early for us here in local time, but yeah. So give us a little history of what it was like. And you were in full-time ministry, you transitioned out, and then you actually ended up going to university from there. So maybe it was a little bit easier. But what was that like? And what was your journey to finding and being intentional about seeking Christian community?
Yeah, awesome. I came out here and I did my DTS with YWAM Honolulu back in 2010 and was on staff here for about 3 years. And in that process, met some really cool people. It's almost like community took me out of full-time ministry, if you will. So we had a Bible study that ran on Wednesday nights. We would surf and skate together throughout the week and then would feed the homeless on the weekends. And it was our attempt at living out the Acts version of church. And really, really fun, deep wells of friendship and community, and we loved Jesus and loved each other. And so a lot of times, our joke here at YWAM is we got to get people out of the bubble. For me, that was my crew that got me out of the bubble. And so just other, life things happen at that point where your mom and dad will only let you, in their words, goof around in Hawaii, for so long. I needed to go to University of Hawaii and try to pursue a degree at that point. And so that was the next step, and went to UH, and God opened a lot of really fun doors over there. Like I walked on the University of Hawaii football team, didn't play in high school.
Wow.
He completely opened that door.
Wow.
Did you play any sports in high school?
I played baseball, basketball, and golf.
Okay.
So I'm very much an athlete, but to walk on at quarterback for a Division I university is next to not heard of.
Yeah. Right.
So, and during that time at UH, I looked at that as being on mission, even though I may not have been in full-time ministry during that time. That was very much my focus. Was I wanted to be a salt and light in that locker room, and I wanted to bring the kingdom come, your will be done in that locker room as it is in heaven. So that was kind of my journey with out of YWAM. And then if I look back on my journey too, even though I may not have had a specific quote unquote role at a church, I still believe in serving. I still believe in offering a helping hand. Strong guys out there, you should carry the chairs and stack them up in the back. Yeah, it goes a long way. I think no matter where you're at, you should still be serving. And it's you don't go to church to be fed. You go to be loved and to get sharpened by other like-minded, loving people, where we're being like Jesus together. You know what I mean? So my mom and dad were church planters, and so I've just been raised in that kind of a mindset of we are the church. We don't go to church to make it happen. I guess this is just who we are. So I don't know. I thought of that just right off the bat with in seeking community, in being in church, even though you don't have a role, doesn't mean you can't be him wherever you're at. So
Right.
Absolutely. How did you start to create that community while you were still in YWAM in this bubble? How did you break out of that and start to create, like the surf skate community?
Yeah. Well, thankfully it already existed, so I got kind of lucky where I just occasionally we have worshipers and people in worship circles that come up to YWAM and play worship, and so I met a couple of those guys, and they invited me to this Bible study called Surf Skate Surrender. For me, it was just kind of following curiosity, and was looking for active, lighthearted, fun people, and it just kind of worked itself out like that. So I think if I was to look at myself across the table, 10, 15 years ago, I'd encourage him to just stay curious and seek out friends that you would be doing fun stuff with, that you already have intrigue, that they played sports, they were outside, they were active. That's something that I naturally am doing already. So I love that the gospel can meet us even in the places where we're naturally bent to. So
So intentionality played a really big role in you being able to find that community. At
the beginning, I kind of stumbled into them, inviting me there, but then staying on top, staying active. It's on you if you want to be known in the community and present. You have control over being present and how much you give yourself to something. So yeah, I guess I could take ownership with that. But then I also attribute it all to the grace of the Lord for that season and bringing those people into my life, because that happened without my involvement in it.
Yeah, and so you just said you were intentional. You were making sure you were pursuing it, and I think that's something that I've heard people kind of maybe miss before in community living, or different ways they might blame the community. I went to a new church and no one reached out to me, so I didn't go back. And so when it comes to finding community, how much is on the community to reach out to newcomers, or maybe friend groups to see someone go after the one, and how much is it actually on the individual to pursue their own community? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. You're cracking open a big can of worms right there. So I think it all goes back to kind of how you're wired and how you're shaped by the Lord and how you interact with Him. I have never succumbed to the idea of, if I go to a church and they're quote unquote unloving, or a small group, something like that, that even if there's a weird vibe, I want to win them over. That's just the way that I'm wired. Even though I'm new, I won't be new next week. I think people, I'm an extrovert, and so I don't have issue making new friends. I feel like we can talk about just about anything. And so if I'm just looking at the Triple S, which was the acronym for that Bible study Surf Skate Surrender I was talking about. If I'm looking at Triple S right now, it was a bunch of cute girls were there. Doesn't go wrong, people loved athletics and sports and being outside, and it was just a fun crew of people. So those three things got me there and kept me there, even if I wasn't naturally clicking with everybody. Like
Interesting.
the why behind why I was there kept me there. You know what I mean? That might. I'm just trying to think of someone who maybe would look to the community as they need to serve me. I think like, what can I do to be a part of this? What can I do to serve them? And so I immediately, I come from mom and dad being in full-time ministry, so I already have that kind of an understanding of what does it take to make something like this possible. And so I immediately can go to the leader at the time, his name was JJ, and be like, hey bro, do you need help with anything? Like, can I help stack chairs? Like, they were pouring it to me. I wanted to give back at the same time. And so, I mean, that's very much a part of the gospel, we love because he first loved us. It's this kind of dance that we do with the Lord. It's a really good question, though. I've been around so many people that have tried to find community, and then they will say that, they're not quite my vibe, and they're not quite loving me in this season or something like that. And there could be a lot that goes into that. Each situation is a million times different from the next. But I do think the heart at which you go into it plays a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think this idea that, the community should serve me, they should go after me, is reflective of a deeper thing in culture, which seems to be this consumer mindset of like, and like, wherever I go, people should be like, I'm important, you know? And it's kind of hard to tell someone in the moment when they're sad that, people aren't pursuing me in community, that, well, you should be the one pursuing. Like, I've had those types of conversations before, like something like, well, like no one invited me out on the weekends, and I'm like, did you message anybody? You know? And this idea that like it's bad, like so sad for me, no one messaged me, is reflective of like the victim mindset we have in our culture of like, if something doesn't happen to me the way I want it to happen to me, then it can't be me at fault. Like that's impossible. Totally. And I think it's something that we need to hear, that hey, no one's going to live your life for you, and no one's going to seek out community for you. Now, as Christians, we do have a part to play in reaching out and being intentional and being compassionate. And I think the corporate group does have some amount of responsibility.
Absolutely.
But it's more on individuals, especially when you come to a certain point in maturity in Christ. It's like, all right, dude, like Paul's like, hey, you got to be eating meat now. You can't be on milk. And so I think that can translate in a lot of different ways, and part of it is like, you can't always be like, so sad victim me, like go text someone, hang out with someone. Now some people are introverts and they're like, I like being alone.
It's almost the same conversation of when you're waiting on the Lord for a job, a spouse. You're not just sitting over twiddling your thumbs, right? You want to be proactive. You have a part to play in this as well. Of, hey, are you getting out there? Are you taking shots? Are you doing what you can do, and then letting the grace and the glory of the Lord follow those actions? So I'm right there with you, man. And I've never, I've always kind of maybe been able to smell consumer Christianity because of being on the other side with my mom and dad in full-time ministry. Growing up in that environment, you could see the church hoppers, you could see the people that were there to consume for what it had to offer. And then you could tell the ones that were there to serve and were there to be a part of this and were authentic. Yeah.
It seems a lot like there's an aspect of perseverance as well. Like, you could definitely go to a place and be serving, but the community could just not accept you naturally. And it could either take a long time, or it could take you trying like multiple instances of churches. But either way, it takes a lot of perseverance, where I think a lot of people might give up after the first like couple tries. You know what I mean? Like, they go somewhere, they're not accepted, or there isn't someone actively like pursuing them, and maybe they're not the best at pursuing, or they don't know what avenue to pursue in service or in trying to find people. Maybe they're an introvert and it's harder for them to connect that way, and they can feel lost and like they can't connect. And I think a lot of it is perseverance.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You have any thoughts on that?
I couldn't agree anymore, and I think people are more naturally inclined to be perseverant than maybe others. Also, life is hard. If you do any life with people for a certain amount of time and you hear their stories and you hear what they've been through, I had a great childhood. Very involved dad from my entire life, coached me in a lot of things, and I attribute my perseverant heart in everything in life really back to my dad in sports. Getting very comfortable pushing past comfort, both physically, mentally, spiritually, that everything I can point back to kind of being raised in that sort of, no, we're going to work hard and we're going to grind till we get this right. And if you want something and you are goal-oriented about it, you put the steps and the work to make that happen. Now, everybody's story is not like that.
Yeah.
In my world, those were the building blocks that made a lot of my success possible. A lot of people weren't fortunate enough to get that. So, yeah, there's I want to be very careful not to generalize too much, because everybody's story is unique, and some people have had to persevere through much more than I ever have.
Yeah. There's also, I think, different contexts for perseverance that we don't understand sometimes. Like, it can be hard for us if we've never had to persevere for like a long period of time in a social aspect, where someone can be really good at vocationally persevering, right? They've had the same job, maybe they had terrible bosses, or they worked really hard to work up the ladder, or whatever it is. They're just a hard worker, but it's not something that they're used to contextualizing into into community. And so it's not that they just don't have the context for it, and even thinking like, I have to use perseverance in this aspect, like it didn't work out at this one church or this one event that we were like focused around to try to find community, and then there's sort of I didn't know I was supposed to persevere in this way. I'm used to it in their lives. Maybe I'm not a lazy person, but they're just not used to it in that context.
Yeah, and looking back at that group that I was a part of, Triple S, it was, for the most part, they were of a like culture that I wanted to be a part of. Not just like friend group doing fun stuff, but they loved Jesus and were hungry to see a gospel of power. And at that time, whenever I was on staff with YWAM, that was first couple of years of me experiencing that in my life. And I was hungry to see if what we read in Acts could be possible. When we prayed in Jesus' name, did something happen? It was a very just fun, explorative time of my life. And there were some people that were hungry for it too. Yeah. So I think you have to answer those questions of the community that you want to be a part of. And are you willing to fight and kick to be a part of it, one, and then two, to like stick with them.
Right. Yeah, that's really good. And another thing, like with the perseverance thing, that makes a lot of sense. With like, you'll go to one church and they'll have a culture that might not naturally fit your niche. Totally. And so you might have to look around at different ministries or different churches, different young adult groups, what have you, to find the culture that you feel most comfortable in. And that's not a bad thing in any regard, like I enjoy playing sports, but I'm not like an insane athlete, and I'm not someone who like is super passionate about being an insane athlete. So I would probably go to, if I was going to go to Triple S, it'd probably be just for community and being around. Yeah. But as soon as you guys are skating and surfing, I'm like, I'm out. I'm not doing either of these. I'll hang out. I'm an extrovert too.
But then even that, we had, plenty of photographer guys there. It was kind of back in the early 2010s when like hipster, coffee scene was really big, and So it was kind of this interesting flux of people. I don't skate at all. I would go to the skate park and throw footballs at them while they were skating around. They'd try to catch it, which was hilarious.
That's awesome.
And honestly, I'm not built for surfing either. I broke my leg third day of my DTS.
Whoa.
Down in Waikiki on a surfboard. And so I can surf. The Lord made me for the land. The Lord definitely made me for the land. So, like that's a great point. In looking back, those things I actually didn't naturally do, but they were so fun, and I wanted to kick it with those people. That was what kind of kept me there.
So when people are looking for community and healthy community, what are attributes of a healthy community that you would advise someone, hey, like you want to find people who are like this, A, B, C?
Sure.
Yeah. So what does healthy community look like?
Yeah, I've had that conversation with people where they're like, I don't have it here, I don't have it there, I'm kind of searching right now. I see that, and I'm 31 now. I've done enough life with people and life with myself that's usually telling that you need to get right with the Lord. I would say you get back with Him in the secret place, get back reacquainted with your identity in Him, and you'll start to find like-hearted people around you that want to come around you, because we're living in His world. He designed this for us to be in community. He designed us for relationship. And I think, it says in Scripture, the pure at heart will see God. And if you are pure-hearted, truthfully trying to live out your calling to the best that you understand it, be love wherever you're at, I think he'll be faithful to come along and bring that community around you. I think there's a lot more that he wants to do than us having to make it happen. I think that's the type of Father and the type of God that we serve. He's just that good and just that loving, and really does care about those. And community is a huge deal in our lives. Huge.
Yeah.
So I think he's much more active and at work there than we give him credit for. Does that make sense? Like pursuing your own walk with the Lord, and I think those other things will iron themselves out.
They'll fall into place.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there's merit to that, because as you seek God and you are pursuing Him in deeper ways, your life starts to change. So I remember when I stopped smoking weed, I stopped hanging out with my friends who smoked weed.
Exactly.
Not because I was like, I didn't make the decision, like, I'm never hanging out with you.
Totally.
I just didn't want to smoke weed. And so I was like, they're like, you want to smoke? I was like, no. And then, I told them too, I'm a Christian now. That's right. And that's when they stopped texting me. But, but then, you leave that, and you find the people who are aligned with Scripture. You find the people who do, Yeah, you know what I mean?
All the time I hear this kind of statement, whether from people who are leaving high school or especially leaving college, and they're losing a lot of their community, right? And we have that a lot of people leaving YWAM after being on staff or being in a DTS or something. Everybody can kind of experience at some point in their life a loss of community and having to rebuild it. And not every time, but most of the time, I'd say I would hear this from people. I'd text them after 6 months of being in that new city or whatever it is. And I'd be like, yeah, how's it going? They'd be like, oh, it's kind of slow or whatever. And I'd be like, well, have you found a community or friends to hang out with or a church? They're like, no, I haven't really found anybody. And I'd be like, oh, like why? And they would, most of the time, if they were following the Lord strongly and in that secret place that you're talking about, they would just say, well, there's not really anyone around here like that. And so
people would equate it to we don't have Triple S in Dayton, Ohio, or something. I had those same conversations with people.
Yeah. So how would you answer that? But also kind of a second question: how much is it on us to create those kinds of people in the community around us by being that light to even more Christians that don't have that secret place.
Yeah, this maybe goes a little bit more into like self-help, like leadership kind of topics, but I really like. I'm sure you guys have heard it. You are the 5 people you surround yourself with. Mm-hmm. Now, if the Lord called you to move, to go to a different city, to move home, I think there are people there to come around you, to shape you, to mold you. You do life together, iron sharpening iron. Now, though Triple S was a really fun environment, there were a couple people in there that I wanted to be like. JJ embodied love unlike anybody I'd ever seen before. The way that he could rally people together. We were poor college kids, but pulled together what we could, went down the Poly Safeway. For those listening at home, it's a Hawaii thing. You may not get it, but and we took a folding table just like this and made like 200 PB&J sandwiches.
Wow.
Just with what we could scrap together, and then went out there and literally fed the homeless from our piggy banks. And so it just seemed so simple, and the willingness to go and do it. And for me, being a part of way too much church, way too much ministry from the moment I could breathe with my mom and dad in ministry, it was refreshing to see somebody live out an authentic gospel. Yeah. And I wanted to be like it. And so I did whatever I could to be around that guy, because I wanted to live like him. So when I think about like our fictitious friend in Dayton, Ohio, I would ask him like, hey, what's the Lord calling you to in your life? Not what's he calling you to in Dayton, but like, let's talk big picture. And let's work back from there of what type of man are you trying to become? Like, how's your fitness? I believe that we're all called, not at extreme measures, but we do need to be physically healthy. And so that has a huge say on how we are physically and spiritually. I think there's a huge tie there, and even biblically too. So I would be asking him those questions. I'd be asking him like, who are you reading right now? What are like some goals you have in mind? And then start to troubleshoot from there of, are you a part of a church? Like, let's look at even some big name churches around that area, because they only got big because of a charismatic leader there, and he might take your call. And it might just be a good person to know. You know what I mean? I'm literally just shooting from the hip here, but that would be some things that I'd be interested in. You have to kind of be proactive about it, I would say.
Yeah, and people have told me too, like the same thing, like, oh, there's not a lot of community here. We don't like the churches, XYZ, and
it might look different. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, but like, Hawaii, from a cultural standpoint, it takes some years of time to get used to how things work out here. If you come with the playbook, I'm from Lake Zurich, Illinois. Shout out to the Bears jersey. You need to throw out that playbook of what worked when you were younger. But then all sorts of new fun stuff comes with. There's so many different cultures here than white suburbia that I grew up in. The stories you hear from people, the natural environment is totally different than that too. So that's part of being shapeable and being teachable in the process. I think YWAMers are already kind of naturally bent towards that, where we're ready to go at a moment's notice. We're well familiar with that phrase, outreach mode, even if we don't want to eat it, we're going to eat it for the sake of the gospel. Not everybody's inclined to be flexible, especially today.
And what's super interesting about that is there's like so much of what you said we could unpack and have like so many hours of content on them. Just like the presuppositions people come with in expectations for community. You know, like you kind of touched on that, when you move somewhere, it takes years to get used to it.
Yeah.
And like with our training in the world we're in, we hear this all the time, and so it's not like surprising to us, but for people who have no context, if they move to a whole new city, they don't have the training that tells them, hey, it takes 6 months to feel normal at a new job.
Mm-hmm.
Like studies, it takes 2 to 3 years to feel like a new place you moved in is home. And you're not really going to truly like probably feel at rest maybe for like 4 or so years. Mm-hmm. And so people move to a new city and expect to be just like, you know, how they grew up. And like take the white suburbia, for example. Maybe you grew up in the Midwest and you moved to a predominantly white area in Texas, and you're expecting it to be the same because the people around you look the same. But that's the South. That's a whole other culture that's totally different, you know? Totally. And so if people don't have that understanding going in, like, okay, I just got here, it'll take a long time for me to be like feeling at home and at peace, at rest. If you have that understanding, like it will take that long. Then when you come into like, oh, I can't, it's hard to find a community, you're like, yeah, of course it is. I don't know what it's like here. But that also puts you in a position to be teachable and to ask the people in that culture, hey, what is the normal thing? And when you engage people in those conversations,
come with a learning heart.
Yeah, especially in Honolulu, right? You talk to anyone in Hawaii, you talk about like, hey, what do people do here? Like how should I as a newcomer like come into the island and respect the culture? You will get respect from a lot of people because you're saying, hey, how do I respect the land? And that's a huge part of the culture.
It's literally a turnoff with local pure Hawaiian people. Mm-hmm. They are a listen first, speak second culture, which is not the stereotypical American white way of going about things. They usually speak first and tell you that they know it better. Mm-hmm. So if you come with a humble and loving heart, you can have a lot of success over here and a lot of quick friends because, again, the pure heart shall see God. Mm-hmm. And I believe He goes before you if you are pursuing the right things. And again, it all goes back to who am I trying to become and how is my walk with the Lord? Am I close with Him? Being step in step, because there is an element of obedience in our walks with Him as much as there is risk taking and just going for it. There's kind of this ebb and flow that you have to learn like a dance in some ways. So yeah.
Wow. For people that maybe are, I know I've had a few friends struggle with this. For people who maybe moved to a new city, they feel convicted I should go to this certain church, but there's maybe knowing their age at that church, or knowing that they that wants to be in like their community that they want to create or be a part of their community. How much is the church body as a whole in that area responsible for coming together across denominational lines or whatever, of being that community like in that city? You know what I mean? Because I have a lot of friends who they're maybe a part of a certain denomination, and there's a lot of cool people that would be in a great community with them at the church next door. But they're at this like one church. You think, leave that church, go to a different one, stay at that church, try to gain that community through some kind of group? Or is there maybe another activity they can center their community around that's outside of the church in general? What do you think is like the best fit? And maybe it's situational and different. But
I definitely think it's situational. I've talked about it a couple of times today, just the importance of getting back to what the Lord's speaking to you and your secret place. There are certain foundations to the Christian life, like being able to hear His voice. They're so stinking foundational that if you don't have those things to walk with, it's going to be very difficult to figure out what to do and just find a direction in this life. To me, I attribute, that's my compass, you know, like that literally is my compass where I seek Him for direction, and I'm trying to be surrendered to Him, and kind of chalk it up to, hey, He spoke, I'm going to trust what He said. Whether it's this church or that church, I may not particularly mess with this person, but hey, I died a long time ago. Remember?
Yeah.
Like I laid my life down for Him. and he's worth it. So, yeah, I think I think if you lined up 1,000 people, you get 1,000 different answers for that one. But for me, at the end of the day, it's what did he say? Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it seems like from our conversation that a lot of what it means to find good community and find a healthy community starts with just surrendering and making sure you're right with the Lord first. And then naturally things will progress, and trusting Him through that surrender, where like maybe someone does surrender, like, all right, I'll go to this church where I'm the only young person, and then they'll most likely get asked to do a lot of volunteering because, well, you're young, you might know how to run the sound equipment, you might do this, and it's like, yeah,
Can you reach that on the high shelf?
Yeah, right.
Literally, the old church that I'm at right now, they need help with like turning the blinds. They can't reach it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
But the thing is, like, we have no idea what that setup could look like in 3 years. And so yeah, I think it does come down to trusting God and just following His direction. And if people are looking like maybe someone just became a Christian, a new convert, or just went to college in a new city, I think they should almost like. Gary Vee talks about this as far as like trying to start our own business. He's like, you should just try a bunch of different things and see what sticks to the wall. And he's like, just try a bunch of things and see what happens.
That's right.
And so it could be that if you enter a new city, a new college, or even if you're not in college but you're next to a college town, just find, if you're like really like starving for community, just find every ministry that's possible for you to go to and try them out. And it's going to be, like you said, it's going to take perseverance. It's going to take it's going to take time. It's going to take energy. You're also going to have probably a job on top of that and your house to take care of. So it might take a year to get to everything.
Yeah.
But you might find it at month 6.
Patience, yeah.
Totally. Yeah, we talked about that earlier about staying curious. And just kind of going from here to there. I look back at... after Triple S, the next community that I was a part of was this church out here called Imagine.
I remember. We used to
load
your truck down and too much weight on the back.
They'd jump in the back of my truck. Luke Miller, a very close family friend of mine, was in his DTS and come pick them up, and we had like 20 YWAMers in the back of my truck at one point. Literally riding it down on top of the tire.
It was bad.
It was like breaking the axle. It was so funny. Where at first it was just me, Luke, and he.
Wow.
But if you know anything about YWAMers, they will multiply. So,
it's almost like when it got too much, we're like, man, this is not half the church is YWAMer. Yeah. We gotta find a new church.
It's not the cool church anymore that only us go to. But that it was a very progressive church at the time, and if I look at my whole life with God, that chunk of time at Imagine was kind of interesting because you were there too, so you can speak a little bit to this, where they didn't really preach the gospel. I'll just be honest. They sometimes sang.
They have Josh Garrels, I think, for worship. It was Leon Bridges. River. They did River.
They did River, and before then they did Rihanna.
Wow, really?
Yes. So it ruffled a lot of feathers out here.
Yeah,
ruffled a lot of feathers.
Great aesthetic, though. I'll give them
that. And
beautiful aesthetic.
For me, as an artist, and my dad was a preacher, and I've been around enough church and preachers to kill a horse. He could communicate. Beautiful wordsmith. It was almost like watching poetry up there, the way that he conducted his sermons. And it wasn't necessarily like earth-shattering and impact, I would say, but I loved listening to it. And so that curiosity at that time, in hindsight, if I would be overly judgmental of myself, would say like, you should have been like doing something different. But that's where the curiosity took me, and learned a whole new side of God that I probably would not have gotten in standard evangelical church with being contemplative and being present, accepting my faults and imperfections. I struggle with perfectionism. Learning about things like the Enneagram, which is like personality type, mixed in with your walk with the Lord, and community that I normally wasn't around. You know, we had a lot of people from different lifestyles, like homosexuality. The LGBTQ community was attending Imagine. It was a very gay friendly church. For me, as you know, an athlete and from a privileged area of the country, you're not around that a whole lot. And so at that time, it was very good to rub elbows with people and hear stories. And I have an appreciation and a love for people and their journeys because of that time where it was so different from YWAM laying hands on people, and we're at University of Hawaii and we're a part of this Bible study called Surf Skate Surrender, and then Imagine looked totally different than that. And so that's part of it. But I look at that time as being very foundational in my walk with the Lord in a way I wouldn't have probably expected.
Yeah, I didn't know what progressive Christianity was at the time. Like that same year you met me was the first time I also found out there's Christians who believe women couldn't speak in church or like teach, and I was like, what? Yeah. So we went to this church, and I saw this beautiful aesthetic, and I was like, this is probably the coolest church I've been in. This feels like a hipster coffee shop, and
totally, you know, it was a cool vibe.
It was awesome.
It was a cool vibe,
and it's interesting because I always have an interest in that type of demographic, but I have like a blue collar background, and I'm not artsy at all. So like I don't really fit in, but I like appreciate it so much. So I'd be around and just like, this is nice. I appreciate this, and I'm like, but I'm so different than you guys. But I think that staying curious thing that you're getting at is really helpful, because when you're curious, you can be open-minded. If you're open-minded, you don't have to agree with everything. And I think people think that if you're open-minded, then you have to agree and affirm whatever someone's saying. And that's not true at all. You know, you can be open-minded and be like, hey, I hear what you're saying. I disagree. Yeah. You know, we have these conversations when we share our faith all the time, you know, but yeah, being curious and open-minded allows you to then step out and meet people and go to these things and engage in conversations. Yeah. And then you just gain a wider horizon of understanding and empathy for people in a way, and you don't have to agree with them. You know, like I was at a coffee shop one time and I was talking to the barista, and then I thought she had an accent, so I asked if she had an accent, and she's like, no, I'm from Canada. I was like, and we just started talking, found out she was a pastor's kid. I had just told her I got back from a mission trip. She invited me to her like church outreach program, and all they would do is they would just make pancakes on Friday night and hand them out for free until 1 a.m. And because they were in a university town, so all the kids going to college all the kids who didn't want to go to parties or were transitioning from one house to another for the parties would stop by and get pancakes. And we'd like share the gospel with like hundreds of people.
Furtick would do the same thing in his dorm room. That's super good. But I want to touch on what you were just talking about of it's okay if you disagree with people. I think that is humongous in it's okay to disagree with someone, and it's okay to have your theology kind of wrecked a little bit. You know, in that time, I really enjoyed learning from that pastor. His name was Kevin, because his views on stuff was very different. And I mean, people even pulled me aside, knew me for a long time, were like, hey, this is like kind of culty, bro. Like, you need to be careful here. And in hindsight, they might have even been right. The church is no longer, you know, existing, and it ended very poorly.
Well, usually charismatic speakers who are good at crafting their words, sometimes it's like, well, they're that way because they're trying to get people in.
Yeah, and, you know, there's biblical things that are just good to, align yourself with having eldership and having some checks and balances in, the church structure, which they did not have. Don't want to talk you guys' ear off about that, but I do think when you're talking about finding community, maybe people are in a new season of life, transition. I'm thinking, again, of our fictitious friend in Dayton, Ohio. It might be a time where the Lord is shaping you a little bit, changing your mind on some things. And just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean that it's not from Him. How many times in Scripture did the Lord call people into very uncomfortable situations?
Yeah.
And I think that's another crutch of our culture, especially in the West, is it easy? Is it quick? Is it comfortable? It's not always in alignment with the way of Jesus.
Right.
He might be calling you into something very difficult.
Yeah, and something that's super, cool, I guess you could say cool, interesting that I find that I was thinking about earlier this week is that the Bible says those who desire to live godly will suffer. And so I'm always like, where do we get this idea that it's supposed to be comfy? And our suffering is kind of like little s,
big, oh dude,
suffering. But for people who haven't suffered extreme things, that little s suffering feels like a big s suffering. And you don't want to invalidate that. But it's like, what if the suffering God puts you through is just maybe 2 years of wandering to find a community? And then, there's character formation there, there's character development. And another thing is, I think, just recognize that you have a lot of life ahead of you. Maybe you're 20, 22, 20, even 24, and you're like, oh no, I should be getting my life ready, I should do that. And I'm like, no, dude, you got like
what Gary Vee was saying, just get your hands dirty.
Yeah.
Get out there and try some stuff.
Well, Gary Vee also says that he tells people who are 40 and they're wanting to do a career shift, he's like, hey, don't worry about how old you already are. He's like, look at how many years you have left. And when I started thinking that way too. I'm like, I got 60 years. It's a long time to do stuff.
Totally. By the way, hot take, I think Gary Vee's a Christian. I just do.
Really?
Oh yeah, I do.
I've thought that before. My brother-in-law thinks that too.
I've gotten a little bit better just with my own tongue and not swearing and that kind of stuff, but I've always succumbed to the idea of use the language of the people you're trying to reach. Some might disagree with that, but not everybody can hang in the circles that I hang in. That I can walk into a locker room with. At University of Hawaii, we had sometimes 5 or 6 nations represented on the same football team, from the rich to the rich to the hood of Compton in LA. You need to be able to carry yourself and speak in a way that demands respect. And so I could be as loving as possible, but the way that I choose to speak would be comfortable for guys like that. So you pull another Christian out of another environment, they're probably not going to do well in there. So I look at a guy like Gary Vee and I look at the fruit of how encouraging he is and the amount of love and life that he's able to pour into people of our generation that desperately need someone like that to tell us, hey, it's okay, there's a long life, don't get bogged down in this rat race of pressure and needing to do things a certain way. It's all good, just keep getting your hands dirty, be curious, and give it time. I've always just in my own heart, this dude, there's something else going on here.
Well, he also always talks about empathy and love, and he's like, you guys have to have empathy, love, empathy, add value. And I'm like, everything you're saying is biblical.
I know, totally.
Yeah. There might be one-off things.
It's like a rough around the edges Christian or something. Yeah.
I never listen to him, so.
Yeah.
I know all the memes.
Yeah. I love when the TikTokers start talking like him.
Oh yeah, totally.
They're like, "Oh, you guys don't understand, okay?" Or something like that. I haven't watched
the garage sales.
Yeah, correct.
I do it because I love it.
Yeah. Some things he says though, where I'm like, rough around the edges Christian, because he'll be like, he said one time, he's like, if I had to start over and I was poor, I was homeless. He's like, I would genuinely steal flowers from people's gardens and sell them on the other block.
Yeah, I know.
And I was like, well,
yeah,
can't do that one.
Exactly.
Can't do that one.
Totally.
Wow.
And then you throw in culture stuff. You know, he's from New Jersey.
Yeah.
You know, he's a tough kid from New Jersey. That's what made him. Yeah.
Cool. It seems like in hindsight, kind of wrapping up, that first we start off, if someone's trying to gain community, build community, we got to start off in that secret place with the Lord, right? And then from that place, we got to take Gary Vee's advice and just get a shotgun and just kind of shoot your shot in a lot of different places. You know, you try what you can try, and you go for it as much as you can, and you try to be intentional, but it's going to take perseverance, and it's going to take patience, along with like being in that secret place with the Lord to find out what he's trying to do in that season. And like you said, like we just talked about, it could take a time of character refinement where the Lord wants to teach you something by yourself, and it's going to take you a year, 2 years to find that community and even see those people be created around you. But the Lord's always doing something in the midst of all of that and in the process. And it's good. Yeah.
And if you are like listening and you're like, oh, I don't know if I can't find a community, it's really hard. You might be the one that God wants to use to build a community. You know, and not many people. Good leaders are the people who don't want to be leaders. You know, so if you're like, I don't want to be the one who gathers and hangs out and organizes and leads. Well, maybe you're supposed to. You know, maybe you have like one-off friends in different areas, and you say, hey, I want to have a hangout. We can all go bowling or movies or play video games or have a barbecue or something like that. Gather all the people and just see what happens. I tried this one time, and I gathered my friends, and they didn't like each other, and I was like a 13, and I was like, I'm never having these guys hang out again. We hung out once when we were like 14, and the next time they hung out all together was at my wedding. Oh, cool. They were like, but they were
and they liked each other then.
Yeah, they like each other, but it's hilarious because they'll both talk to me and be like, remember that one time at your house that we all hung out and it was just like really weird? And I was like, you know, he told me that like last month. And they're like, really? I'm like, yeah. But you know, take your shot, gather people and see what can happen.
That's right. It doesn't need to be big. I think that's another big lesson that I've learned through my 20s and now into my 30s is re-evaluating that word of significance. I think, you know, I come from mega church land where if you don't have hundreds of people in your youth group, like, what are you doing, bro?
Yeah.
Like, get a life. But what, like, is the Lord calling you to do? Like, I'm sure he's really excited about whatever win you have going on in your life or the losses, however big or small.
Yeah.
There needs to be I'll share this story real quick while we're on the topic of significance. There was a super small miniature golf place in Upper Wisconsin we would go to every summer in Door County, Wisconsin. And this miniature golf place was called the Red Putter. And we loved going there. Rinky-dink, like the turf on the ground was all moldy and like just, it looked like a trailer park. But to us, it was heaven. And we went there every single year from the time I was like 6 or 7 all the way till I graduated high school. It was like a tradition. And the same guy worked behind the counter. His name was Bob, and he wore this top hat. And he was the owner. About the time I was out here doing YWAM, I saw a Facebook post that Bob had passed away. And on like the comments were thousands of stories just like mine of how much they loved the Red Putter. It was a foundation of their childhood. And if you looked at that guy's life from a one-day perspective, it probably doesn't look all that significant. He starts his car in Upper Wisconsin, goes to a miniature golf place and sits there for 8 hours a day, checking kids in to play mini golf. But when you look at the impact that he can have in that one little thing over the scope of a life given to something, totally reevaluated my idea of significance at that time.
Awesome.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, I think this is a great place to then kind of wrap up and ask one more question. We like to, great story, by the way. They're really inspiring.
Yeah.
I don't want to dismiss that
No,
at
you're
all.
good.
Yeah. But we always like to ask the people who come on our show, because we created the show to answer hard questions of the Christian faith, talk about the gray areas of the Christian faith. we would go evangelize and share the gospel, and people would be like right down at university or different places, and so many people left Christianity because of similar reasons, like they had hard questions that weren't answered. And so that's why we exist. And so we always like to ask our guests, what has been the hardest question you faced in your Christian walk, and what was the answer you found that helped you continue to be a Christian?
Question or situation, even.
Yeah.
That made you doubt your faith or struggle with your faith, something like that.
Or was there one?
Yeah. Take time to think about it too. It's a crazy one.
That's a deep question.
It's a big question. We should probably prepare our guests for it. We're just going to ask at the end.
Yeah.
That's okay. I think for me, like, one of the biggest questions is like, does he really care? Like, really? Like, put all the Christian bullshit on the side, sorry. But truly, like, does he really care about my life? Because if you're a Christian long enough, you can do the right things, you can say the right things, you can formulate your life to get in the flow where God's favor is going to follow you, or how we deem it God's favor, you know. I'm in a season right now where I'm just starting to realize he cares. Things that are so near and dear to my heart. Just starting to see like the sun creep over the horizon with his faithfulness with it. And I've waited and been patient and trusted. Really, these last 3 years, I got to a place of truthfully wondering, do you really care? So I don't quite have the ending answer to that just yet. But I think it's got to be one of the big questions for a lot of people is, does he actually care? Yeah. Because there's only so many Christianese stupid Bible, answers that you can give to that, because there's so much depth and hurt and pain in a question like that. And you guys were talking about going down and sharing the gospel in a place like University of Hawaii. I don't know if we as Christians are meant to give one word or quick answers to something like that.
Right.
Answers to questions like that can only be answered in life lived with people. Rubbing elbows with people, letting them know that you're going to be there for them, being Jesus in that friendship. It's bigger than just having the right answers. It's living a life and living like a person for them. Which is who we're called to be anyway. That would be my long-winded answer for that.
That's awesome.
That's good though. Yeah.
Even for the individual, it takes a lot of faith to sit in that place and not be too uncomfortable to just call it quits or leave it. You know what I mean? That's a hard place to be in. That's an uncomfortable place to be in. To have that kind of an existential question, because it affects a lot of things. And so to be able to sit in that place and be able to know like God, do you care, and be there for an extended amount of time until you see his faithfulness again, until you see like you said, like that the sunrise come up, or until you're on the mountaintop again, like can take a long time. It can take a lot of perseverance, but it's so worth it.
I hope so. I'm still kind of in process. I'm in a rubber meets the road season of my life of I've read all these things, I think I have faith for them. Are you going to come through? I'm at that point. And so...
That's great. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks for the transparency and honesty.
Guaranteed.
And when it comes to stuff like that, it's like you said, it's life to live with people that try to answer that. And really, I think it's just like living and existing, and just you can't. There's no quick answer. You can't figure this. It's not like a math problem you can just like deal with until you solve it and finally put it away. It's like this is something that just happens over the course of a long time.
Totally.
And the answer might not be revealed for years and years, and then you look back like, oh yeah, that's because we had some people on our guests who talked about the same similar things of like they had hard seasons in their Christian walk, and they didn't know what was happening. They asked God these things, and finally they realized like, oh yeah, I saw God's love in the way I was seeking it in friendships I found at the churches I started going to.
That's right.
And how God uses His body to minister to each other.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes in at least the charismatic situation, we can have I don't want to say too high, but too high of an expectation on the personal. I don't want to be blasphemous, so I'm trying to be careful.
Okay.
But we put all this like emphasis on like, oh, you and God alone. That's what's going to help you. Like, oh, you're struggling with faith. Like, you and God. God will figure it out to you. You will. And it's like, but 2,000 years of church history has always linked elbows and leaned on community and had each other, and like people like looked towards their Christian community to find God.
Totally, yeah. And God has spoken through the individual in the community.
Yeah. And at least in my experience, where it's a lot of emphasis on the individual and their walk with God.
Totally.
And it's not like
that's an American Western way of thinking of it's my thing. We're individualistic. I'm going to figure it out on my own. You look at, I'm thinking of the story of Joseph. How many characters were involved in that story? You know, his brothers throwing him in the pit and then sending him off into slavery. Him being promoted in Egypt with Potiphar's wife in prison, the 2 people in prison. How many people were involved in that story? It's not just him and God. You know, like it's the same thing in our lives. So many people mold and shape us into who we are. I feel something on my heart though. If I had like one thing to encourage like believers out there, it would be this: like, it's okay if you don't know. It's okay if you don't know things. I think the mistake in modern Christianity is thinking that we have to have the answers, or that we have to give people the answers. It's okay if you don't know. Sometimes the best answer for people is, bro, I don't know. I'm figuring it out though.
Yeah.
And just sitting there in that place. Like, we don't need to have an absolute answer if we're working it out on our own. With like friends that are non-believers, I'm more focused on being their friend than having an answer that's going to shift their life or something like that, and then allow the gospel to work its way through our friendship together.
Yeah, and that's like when you're friendship with people who aren't Christians, you should not look at every time you hang out with them like, I'm preach the gospel this time. It's like,
gotta get in one time every hangout.
Yeah,
you're not going to be hanging out with them.
No, you're not. Right?
They're not going to hit you up anymore.
They want friends.
That's
you
right.
know? And I've had friends.
Be a good hang, man.
Right.
Yeah. Be funny.
I've had people that like I hung out with, and we were coworkers, and he was like, you know, you were like your work best friend. He was my work best friend. Was
work
like
bestie.
Yeah, he's my work bestie, and he's atheist. But we worked in the same welding booth. I would do like one half of the project, he would do the other, so we could do like double every day. How they set us up. But we hung out all the time, and we would like go to the bar together, and then we would talk, and I would be like probably every once in a while, like he'd ask me a question about my faith, and we would talk, and he's like, I don't agree with anything you say, but I like you a lot.
Dude, that right there is a humongous win that I think Christianity needs to shift their focus to. If we can get non-believers looking at us as, they're cool. Man, I don't know what it is about that guy, but he listens to me, he doesn't judge me, he sits with me through my stuff, we have great conversations. Maybe there's more like him, and maybe, just maybe, that Jesus resembles something in him. Like, that literally is the true power of our gospel. Yeah. Of what we live and try to believe in. That's exactly it. I've had that same conversation and had people say that exact same thing to me multiple times, and that is so much more of a win in my book than getting someone to say the simple gospel or pray the prayer, you know?
Right.
That is evident to me of a curious heart and one that is wanting more. That's cool.
Yeah, he's great, and like we would hang out, and even when I go back home sometimes, right, it's been a couple of years because I've moved here, but I would go back home after not seeing him for a while, and we'd hang out, like me, him, and another one of our coworkers, and it was a great time. We would always goof off together, and then he told me he was quitting, and I was like, "What the heck, dude? What's your problem?" But
and then you went to Wyoming.
Actually, yeah.
It worked out.
He was gonna help me get a job where he was at his new place. He's like, yeah, I've been working there for a bit. They really like me. I told them about you, and I told them you're like a pretty good worker and pretty sharp, and you'd be easy to train. So they're ready to interview you when you get back from your religious studies. And then I never came back from my religious studies. But it sounded like cool work. He builds basically eyes for robots.
Whoa.
And so he travels the world installing these eyes on these robots to.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
It sounded so cool. I was like, when God's like, go into full-time ministry, I was like,
But
see,
robot
are you
eyes.
sure?
robot eyes.
Community everywhere, bro.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, no. Obviously, surrendering to the Lord has been way fruitful. We have this podcast. We have friends. We know, like you and I are friends, and just the expanse that God has given when you just surrender. It's amazing.
Come on, dude.
But yeah, well, thank you so much for coming up on the podcast. Do you want to plug anything? I know that you're working with ESPN Honolulu. You guys have a podcast. You're going to be a host of the afternoon show soon. So is there, and you have a couple other like side hustles you do as well. Is there anything you want to plug?
Oh man, I have too many side hustles. If anything, I just plug this podcast. This is the only thing that you guys see. Like, check these guys out, man. They've got great hearts, going about it the right way, and it's powerful to help people find community, man. It really is. I think that's extremely needed right now. So yeah, you guys keep doing your thing, man. It's awesome.
Thanks.
Appreciate it, man.
Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, thanks for watching. Come back next week, every Wednesday. See ya.
Adios.